Hey, everybody, welcome to Pit Stops to Podium, the Rep Partners podcast where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. Well, my name is Brendan Tollison. I am the co-founder and CEO of Rep Partners, and I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, who is Sarah Lee. Sarah, welcome to Pit Stops to Podium.
Hey, Brendan, excited to be here.
Well, Sarah has become a friend. Sarah is currently serving as the COO of an amazing company called New Story, one of my favorite companies really out there. And Sarah, how about you give our audience a little bit of background on who New Story is, your mission, your vision, et cetera, because I think it's pretty compelling.
Yeah, for sure. So probably different than a lot of guests that you have. New Story is a nonprofit. So we are focused on pioneering solutions to end global homelessness. And really practically, that means that we build homes and communities throughout Haiti, El Salvador, Bolivia, and Mexico. And in those countries, we've built about 2,500 homes in our first 6 years.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I mean, I think to your point, this is our first nonprofit. But what's really even, the mission is amazing, and it's been picked up by a variety of places. How about you walk them through the Y Combinator piece? Because I think that's a really compelling narrative, especially for our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So two things people love to talk about with New Story. Number one is we were one of the first nonprofits to go through Y Combinator. So, many people know Y Combinator as one of the top startup incubators. They have hosted people like, Airbnb, Dropbox, some of the world's biggest companies. And New Story was able to go through that, right? And the benefit of that as a nonprofit is they treat you just like everybody else. And so it is the same in insane growth targets that they have on, the week-to-week basis during Y Combinator. And so that is really how New Story got started. The other thing that is something people often ask about, if they are like, I feel like I've heard of these people, but I'm not quite sure. We also completed the world's first 3D printed community where families who are, living on less than $3 a day are moving in. And so a lot of people also know us as, oh yeah, you're the nonprofit that did 3D printing homes for vulnerable families.
The way my mind works is I try to simplify it to you're the millennial version of Habitat for Humanity. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but it helps me kind of articulate what you guys do.
I like it.
Sarah, what we have a tradition here at Pit Stops to Podium, and that's really getting to know our guest outside of work. So before we get into our big idea, I'd love for you to share a few fun facts about yourself that our audience wouldn't know about you outside of being the Chief Operating Officer of New Story.
All right. So the first one, I always use this anytime I have to give fun facts, and that is I'm the only girl in my family in 6 generations.
Wow.
So lots of brothers, lots of uncles, and nephews. So yeah, only girl there. I am obsessed with sleep. You will never meet a bigger sleep advocate than me.
Do you track your sleep? Do you have like the Whoop or whatever the device is that my team tells me about every day?
I have had a Whoop previously when Fitbit, first came out with sleep tracking. I had all that. I really don't track it that much anymore because I'm really super consistent with it, but I will sacrifice about anything in life during seasons except for sleep. I will never sacrifice on my sleep.
How many hours do you need?
Minimum of 8 hours.
Okay, 8 hours. All right. What's your third fun fact?
My third fun fact is that I really like fun and I really don't like fun facts.
I was hoping you would give our audience a little bit of insight into this new program that you tried to guilt me into this past week. So
we would have to do a whole podcast on that. So it doesn't have time to fit in this one.
That's good. I like that. Well, let's move on to the big idea. I think this is a really kind of pertinent one for a lot of companies that experience that growth and scale. And it's really, how do you stay human in the midst of that transition? So there's a skill set required at one phase, and then it ultimately needs to move into that maturity. But there's a balance there and there's a tension there. And I think you're a great person to speak through that transition. And ultimately, how do you maintain that human component in the midst of that growth? So let's start. As we think through this kind of big topic, let's talk about that startup phase in terms of those characteristics and the type of people that you need as you take an idea and actually operationalize it into not only an idea, but a business.
Yeah, Brendan, this is something that I think is really interesting because a lot of people don't think about this when they think about scaling a company. They only think about the positive long-term side. And as you're starting a company, right, you know this, you need a team of generalists. You need people who, in everything they do, it's just about creativity and grit. Nothing is the same. Every single time they're having to reinvent to actually figure out what worked. And then you hit a place and you realize, okay, we know what works. We need to bring in more people to start scaling our team, our operations, our revenue, everything involved in the company or organization. And that can be really painful because then you're bringing in people who are experts in one thing. And as a founder, as an executive team, as a team who's been around since the beginning, it can be really hard to know when to let people do things exactly how they've been done. And when do you need people to start looking at the approach in a different way to drive greater success?
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good transition to the kind of the next idea here is just how do you balance that? And how do you say when it's okay and when it's not okay?
Yeah, so how we have done it is we've tried to really segment the things that we are sure they work, right? If we have something and we're sure it works just this way, bringing people on who are going to do it that way, but they're having a mindset of, are there places that this can be improved, right? At New Story, we often talk about that, like, nothing is ever perfect and nothing is ever as perfect as it could be. And so having people working on the team who are completing tasks, completing, their OKRs at any given time, but are looking at, are there ways to make this better without disrupting the progress towards results is one way that we, really look at that. And then another way I think about it is just, what are the things that you do need to reinvent, right? How can you have teams or individuals within your company or organization who are always going to be on the generalist, super scrappy, they're your like SEAL Team 6 team that is working on very new and different things that aren't going to fit into the same, long-term operationalized things that everything else in the organization does.
Yeah, and maybe for the audience, just to give a little bit of context, from a News Story perspective, how many employees do you have today?
We have 30.
Okay. And so as you think about kind of 0 to 30, or there are certain milestones, whether it's revenue or you mentioned 3D printing, are there certain things that you think of that happened that required you to build the process or systems, et cetera, to enable you to continue to grow?
Yeah, the biggest ones have been on the revenue side and then on the management of our partners internationally. And so on the management of the partners internationally, that has been hard because it is a process that's run the same, no matter if it's a community in Haiti or community in Mexico, but those are vastly different experiences, right? There's a lot of different challenges. And so that's one piece that has been, somewhat challenging in that. And then on the revenue side, it's always a challenge, I think, for any revenue teams as you go from founder-led revenue to team-led revenue. And so that transition from Brett, our CEO, being the person who's bringing in 90+% of our revenue to spreading that out amongst a team, I think is the other place that we've really seen this manifest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a good transition maybe into the last point that we want to discuss, which is oftentimes scale can feel like a dirty word for that early kind of startup team. And so how do you maintain that kind of human element that you described to keep that in that tension of growth, the startup type mindset in terms of the great things that means for that building phase to keep that enduring in the right way? So what are some specific examples in terms of how to maintain that human aspect within that growth and scale?
I think one of the easiest ways to make sure that your team and your company is staying human as you scale is to ensure that everyone has the freedom and flexibility and that you as a leader are encouraging them to look outside of the box that's in front of them, right? Everybody has tasks. Everybody has individual things that they have to do. But by really being the exemplar for how do you look outside of just that task and see how it's going to impact the organization as a whole, I think helps keep the organization really nimble and help keep you really human. I think another thing that is really, really practical is as you scale, things start getting more operationalized, right? You have templates now for things. You have very specific language you use around certain things. And I think one of the easiest reminders for anyone in any role that they're in is just writing and talking like a human, we often want to have these perfect sentences with our how we're different than everybody else and exactly what we provide and why you should care. Those are the emails. That's the language that everybody's getting every single day of their lives, right? So whether it's within your team on Slack, emails going out to prospects, or anything in between, really figuring out how do you keep that human element and write and talk like a human while keeping things excellent and professional and taking the learnings that you've had up until this point, but really the combination of taking those learnings with the human uniqueness, I think, is ultimately what helps people stand out and what helps them scale further.
Yeah, for one reason or another, to your point, there's a temptation to lose that. And kind of the theme that I heard from you is authenticity, and how do you maintain that in the midst of scale? And so that is part of the DNA that's critical to your success and ultimately to a lot of other companies. And I can speak personally because we've worked with New Story, that energy and the human element. You guys have done an amazing job at creating culture which instills that. And everyone that we engage with at New Story has that component in terms of just being themselves, but also being able to communicate in a way that's very much human to how you just described it. So I can speak firsthand that it's not only from the top, but it's also amidst the entire organization. So good job in creating that type of environment.
Thanks. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. And so Sarah, as we kind of wrap up here, what are some practical ways in which our audience can engage with the amazing mission that New Story has, and also ways in which they can learn more from you?
Yeah, for sure. So the easiest ways is whether it's our website or all social is just New Story Charity, newstorycharity.org online, or all of our social. And so really that's the easiest way to see what we have and what's going on. We have a program called The Neighborhood, which is our monthly giving program, which is a really easy way for people to just set a subscription like they would Spotify or anything else, and really contribute to the impacts that we're having around the globe. And then in terms of me, Twitter and LinkedIn are probably the places that I am most active, and happy to chat with anyone about these topics further.
Well, great, Sarah. Thank you so much for making a little time to stop by the podcast and continue to do some great work at New Story. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brendan.
Talk to you later.
Bye.